Hey everyone, and welcome to this deep dive. We are going to be checking out some really interesting teaching notes and excerpts from a children's literature textbook. And what I think is really cool about all this is how they use a single story,
Right.
the best Christmas present in the world, to teach not just about history, but also about different literary techniques
Yeah.
and even grammar. There's a lot going on in here. We got like a wartime Christmas truce,
Okay.
a letter that's like a century old,
Wow.
and even a connection to classic literature.
Interesting.
Yeah. So you're going to love this.
It's amazing how much you can learn from just one story.
Right.
I mean, and these materials really stress moving past like just memorizing stuff
Yeah.
and getting teachers to connect with what their students are into.
Totally.
Yes,
I mean,
I-
think about it.
Yeah.
It's one thing to learn about something historical from a textbook,
Yeah.
but it's totally different to experience that same event through a story.
It's way more engaging.
Exactly. It's like you're stepping into a time machine.
Yep. Absolutely. And these notes take it even further. They use the best Christmas present in the world to dig into things like how language works and like specific literary techniques.
Cool.
So it's not just a history lesson, it's like a multifaceted learning experience.
Okay, so this Christmas story is set during a war.
It is. The backdrop is the Christmas truce of 1914 during World War I.
Wow.
Like, can you imagine that? British and German soldiers just putting down their weapons for a moment of peace on Christmas Day?
That is unbelievable.
Right.
It's hard to fathom that kind of shift, going from fighting to celebrating
Yeah.
what actually happened during this truce.
Well, the story talks about soldiers venturing out into no man's land.
Right.
That super dangerous area between the trenches.
Yeah.
They exchanged gifts like rum and sausage. They sang Christmas carols together.
Wow.
And they even played a friendly game of football.
It's like a powerful reminder that even in the worst of times,
Yeah.
people can still find a way to be human with each other.
Yeah. It makes you think about all the emotions those soldiers must have been going through.
For sure.
I mean, on one hand, they were enemies fighting for opposite sides,
Right.
but they were also just young men far from home, probably missing their families.
Yeah.
So this truce, this unexpected connection they had, it really shows how powerful shared humanity can be.
Absolutely.
It transcended all their political differences.
So speaking of connections, there's this really surprising one in the story between a soldier and a famous author.
Yes! It turns out the German soldier Hans Wolff learned English by reading Thomas Hardy's novels,
No way.
especially Far from the Madding Crowd.
That is so wild. A soldier finding comfort in the words of somebody from the enemy nation.
It really shows you the power of literature, doesn't it?
It really does.
It offers escape,
Yeah.
comfort,
Uh-huh.
even shared experiences, no matter where we come from or what our circumstances are.
Okay, so I keep hearing about this mysterious desk.
Oh, yeah.
The notes mention things like fire damage,
Right.
a secret drawer, and a letter from a soldier named Jim.
That's where things get really interesting.
What's the story there?
Well, the story centers around this antique desk that the narrator finds in a junk shop.
Okay.
He's restoring it, and he finds this hidden compartment.
Ooh,
And inside is this letter written by a British soldier named Jim McPherson.
cool.
And get this, it's dated December 26, 1914.
So this letter's like a first-hand account of the Christmas truce.
Exactly. Jim's letter describes what it was like to be there.
Wow.
Meeting Hans Wolff, their unexpected friendship.
That's
It
incredible.
was like stepping back in time through his words.
I'm hooked already. What else can you tell me about Jim McPherson?
Well, from the letter, we know he's a school teacher from Dorset, England.
Okay.
And he describes the truce with this mix of like awe and disbelief.
Yeah.
You know, it must have felt so surreal to share Christmas with the enemy.
Right. It really makes you think about how those kinds of experiences, those moments of shared humanity,
Yeah.
can change how we see the world. And what about Hans Wolff? We know he plays the cello and loves Thomas Hardy.
Mm-hmm.
What else does the letter say about him?
Well, Jim describes him as this kind and thoughtful man who speaks English fluently.
Wow.
And you can tell how passionate he is about English literature.
That's cool.
He even shares Jim's love for Far from the Madding Crowd. They talk about the characters and everything.
Wow. Imagine finding that common ground, that shared passion in the middle of a war.
Right.
It's really something.
But then the mystery deepens.
Oh, no.
What happens to Jim? Does he survive the war?
Right.
And what's the connection between the letter and the desk's previous owner?
Those are the questions that keep you reading.
Exactly. The teaching notes want us to really dig in and use the clues to put the pieces together.
Oh, I love a good puzzle.
Yeah.
So what clues should we be looking for?
Well, we know the desk was damaged probably by both fire and water.
Right.
And the letter was hidden in that secret compartment addressed to a Mrs. Jim McPherson. It really makes you wonder about where this desk has been.
Yeah.
You know, the stories it could tell.
There's definitely got to be some connection between Jim,
The letter writer.
yes,
Yeah.
and the desk's original owner.
Sure.
But what happened to them?
Right.
And why did the desk end up in a junk shop?
The story doesn't give us all the answers.
Oh.
It wants us to think critically and draw our own conclusions.
That's like we're detectives solving a historical mystery.
Exactly.
So what about the letter?
Yeah.
The narrator doesn't just keep it to himself, right?
You're right. He feels like he has to deliver it.
To Mrs. Jim McPherson.
Yes. And that adds a whole other layer to this already fascinating story.
So does he find her?
He does. But their meeting is both heartwarming and heartbreaking.
Oh, no.
And that's a story for part 2 of our deep dive. Welcome back to our deep dive into the best Christmas present in the world.
So last time we left off,
Yeah.
our narrator was trying to deliver Jim McPherson's letter
Right.
to his wife.
Mrs. McPherson.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And you mentioned it gets a bit heartbreaking.
It does.
What did he find when he finally tracked her down?
So he found out that Mrs. McPherson,
Okay.
who is now 101 years old,
Wow.
her name is Connie,
Okay.
and she's living in a nursing home.
Uh,
And on this particular day, she's
yeah.
actually in a separate room
oh, no.
because she's been a bit confused lately.
Right.
And the narrator really gets this sense of loneliness around her.
Yeah, I can imagine.
You know, no family, no regular visitors.
That's really sad, especially during Christmas.
It is.
To be that old and alone
To carry the weight of a century
Yeah.
and be alone,
is heavy.
it is.
But we have to remember, this letter was written in 1914.
That's right.
So for like over 70 years,
Mm-hmm.
Connie has probably held on to Jim's last letter.
Probably read it countless times.
Right. And just kept his memory alive all that time.
Trying to hold on to that connection.
That's incredible.
It is.
That kind of love and hope after so much loss.
And after so much time has passed,
It's really remarkable.
it really is.
So what happens when the narrator gives her the letter?
Okay, so
To know.
the narrator introduces himself as a friend of Connie's,
Okay.
and he presents her with the letter.
Uh-huh.
And as soon as she sees that familiar tin box,
Yeah.
her eyes light up.
Wow.
She recognizes it.
So she knows it's from Jim.
Yes, but here's the thing.
Okay.
She mistakes the narrator for Jim.
Oh, wow.
She thinks he's finally come home after all these years.
That is both beautiful and heartbreaking at the same time.
It is.
After waiting for decades.
Yeah.
Her mind has created this reality where Jim has returned to her.
Yeah, it's like her love and hope have become so powerful
Yeah.
that they've kind of blurred the lines between what's real and what's not.
So what does the narrator do?
Well, he finds himself in a really tough spot.
Yeah.
Because if he tells her the truth,
Yeah.
it's going to shatter her illusion
Right.
and probably cause her a lot of distress.
But if he plays along, she gets to live out her final days believing that Jim is back.
It's a huge dilemma, isn't it?
Yeah. He has to choose between truth and compassion.
Yeah, and the story really emphasizes how difficult that decision is.
What would you do?
I don't know. It's such a hard choice.
Yeah.
Do you prioritize the truth even if it hurts?
Right?
Or do you choose compassion and let someone hold on to a comforting belief?
Even if it's not real.
Exactly.
So what does he choose?
He chooses compassion.
Wow.
He sits with Connie and lets her believe he's Jim.
That's amazing.
And he listens to her as she reminisces about their life together.
So she's sharing memories of Jim.
Yeah, probably things that were in those earlier letters.
Right.
The ones she received before his last one.
That's so bittersweet.
It is.
He's giving her this final reunion,
Mhm.
even though it's not the one she probably imagined.
It's like he's giving her a final gift.
Yeah.
A moment of peace and closure.
And it shows that sometimes the kindest thing you can do for someone
Yeah.
is just to be there with them.
Just be present.
Yeah, and offer comfort without judgment.
And to really see the emotional truth of a situation.
Even if it's not the same as the factual truth.
Exactly.
Now, I'm curious about the Christmas cake.
Oh, yes.
The notes mention it a few times,
Mm-hmm.
and it seems to be pretty important in the story.
Well, the Christmas cake represents all those good things about the holiday.
Like what?
The warmth, the generosity, that festive spirit.
Okay.
And in the story, it becomes this tangible connection
Between who?
Well, first between Jim and Hans during the truce,
Okay.
and then later between Connie and the narrator in the nursing home.
So it's like a symbol of their shared humanity.
Yes, and how even in the midst of difficult circumstances, people can find these moments of joy and connection.
And remember, Connie baked a Christmas cake for Jim,
Right.
and she's been waiting all these years to share it with him.
Waiting for him to come home.
So when she offers a slice to the narrator,
Who she thinks is Jim.
right, it's like a wish finally coming true after decades.
It's like the story has come full circle,
Yeah.
highlighting the power of love, hope, and those simple things that make life meaningful,
It really makes you think about how much those small acts of connection matter.
especially as we get older.
This story is so moving.
It is.
And the teaching notes really encourage you to dig deeper,
Yeah.
like analyzing the characters' motivations
Yeah.
and that theme of war versus peace.
It's all there.
But let's go back to the mystery of the desk for a minute.
Okay.
Why was it sold?
Right.
And what happened to Jim after the war?
Well, remember how damaged the desk was?
Yeah.
It's like it went through something really traumatic.
Yeah.
And this story mentions a fire at Jim and Connie's home.
Oh, right.
It doesn't say exactly when it happened,
Mm-hmm.
but it could have been after the war.
Okay.
So maybe after Jim died, Connie had to sell their belongings,
Oh, that's sad.
including the desk.
With the letter inside.
Yeah, it's like this symbol of everything she lost.
And how time keeps moving on.
It makes you think about how even our most prized possessions
Yeah.
can become burdens.
Or reminders of what's gone.
Exactly.
Sometimes you have to let go,
Even if it's hard.
even if those things mean a lot to you.
Because sometimes letting go is the only way to move forward.
But those objects, those pieces of the past,
They can help us keep those memories alive.
this has been such a thought-provoking conversation.
It has.
We've talked about history and language,
Mm-hmm.
the difference between truth and compassion,
Yeah.
and the power of love and hope.
It's amazing how much one story can teach us.
I know, and now I'm really interested in how the teaching notes use this story to explore grammar.
Oh, that's what we'll be talking about in part 3 of our deep dive.
Okay, awesome. So we've talked about the history behind the best Christmas present in the world.
Mm-hmm.
We've looked at the literary connections,
Right.
and we even got into the emotional side of things.
Yeah, the compassion versus truth dilemma.
Exactly.
That was a tough one.
It really was.
But now I'm excited to dig into the grammar stuff.
Me too. The teaching notes really emphasize how the story can be used to explore different grammar concepts.
And it makes sense when you think about it.
Yeah.
Instead of just learning grammar rules in a vacuum,
Right.
you get to see them in action.
Yeah, like how they actually work in a story.
And how they shape the narrative.
Totally. I remember struggling with grammar in school.
Oh, yeah.
It always felt so boring and technical.
Yeah, I get that.
But seeing it applied in a story, especially one as interesting as this,
Right.
it just makes it click.
It's like the difference between reading about a recipe
Right.
and actually tasting the dish.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, so one of the grammar points the notes focus on is the past perfect tense.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one.
It shows how different tenses work together to create a timeline in a story.
It's all about sequence and when things happened.
I always had trouble with the past perfect.
It can be tricky.
Can you break it down for me using the story as an example?
Of course. So remember how the story jumps back and forth between the present
The narrator
Right.
and the past.
with Jim's letter?
Yeah, so we've got two separate timelines happening.
Exactly. And to show the difference between those timelines,
Yeah.
the author uses the past perfect to describe things that happened even earlier.
Then the Christmas truce.
Yes.
Even before that.
Okay, can you give me a specific example?
Sure. Think about when the narrator describes the desk.
Okay.
He says, both fire and water had clearly taken their toll on this desk.
Right.
That's the past perfect.
Okay.
And it tells us that the damage happened before the narrator even found the desk.
So it's like a timeline within a timeline?
Exactly. It adds this extra layer of time.
Yeah.
And it makes you wonder about the desk's history
For sure, like what happened to it?
and all the stories it could tell.
Right. And it's all because of that one little grammatical choice.
It's amazing how much impact those small details can have.
Now, the teaching notes also mention phrasal verbs.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Those are fun. They're not something I usually think about when I'm reading, but it's a good reminder to pay attention to vocabulary,
And phrasal verbs are everywhere in English.
especially when people are talking.
Right. It's more natural and informal.
But they can be confusing.
Because the meaning isn't always clear from the individual words.
Can you give me an example from the story?
Sure, one that comes to mind is a run out.
Okay.
Like we had run out of drinking water,
Right.
meaning they had used up all their water.
Yeah.
So run out in that context.
Yeah.
It means something different than just run by itself.
It's like those two little words create a whole new meaning when you put them together.
And that's why it's so helpful to see them in context.
Like in a story.
Exactly. It helps you understand the nuances and start using them yourself.
This deep dive has been incredible. We started with a simple Christmas story,
Yeah.
and we ended up talking about history and language.
We explored some pretty deep themes, too.
Yeah, like the nature of truth and compassion.
And the power of storytelling.
It really shows that learning can be an adventure.
It's all about those aha moments.
And sometimes the most unexpected sources can lead us to the most profound insights.
That's so true.
So before we wrap up, I wanted to touch on one last point from the teaching notes.
Okay.
They suggest using the story to spark discussions about war and peace.
It's a great way to get people thinking about those bigger issues.
It really makes you reflect on how pointless war is,
And the importance of showing compassion.
even to those we might consider enemies.
It's about finding common ground.
Yeah, and building bridges instead of walls.
And it's amazing how a story about a Christmas truce
Yeah.
can lead to such profound conversations.
I know, it's really powerful.
It gives us hope that peace is possible.
This deep dive has been a true gift.
I agree.
Thank you so much for sharing your insights.
It's been a pleasure.
And to our listeners, thank you for joining us on this journey.
We hope you enjoyed it
We hope you'll keep exploring the power of stories.
and all the ways they can enrich our lives.
Until next time.
Bye, everyone.